Hello and welcome to variation 27. This variation is about string crossings in spiccato, and it's quite fast and it has accents on the first of each group of four. So as a preparatory exercise, and seriously I do this every time before I actually start practicing this variation, is to play it in double stops. The reason for this is, first of all, if you play it in double stops, your left hand knows exactly what to do. You don't need to think about which notes you need to play anymore later on. Your left hand knows which notes come. That's very important because you need to concentrate on the bow. You can't concentrate on the left hand in this variation. The next thing is that it really sorts out your intonation. It sorts out your correction speed. It helps your sound. So it's a little bit tedious, but definitely practice the whole variation in double stops. This is what I do when I start practicing this every time. In the next bit, it becomes particularly important because you're going to be going into second position. It's a little bit uncomfortable, so you definitely need to practice this in double stops. So practice the whole variation in double stops and make sure it's in tune, make sure you know which notes are coming, and particularly secure that bit where you're going to go into second position. That's bar 11 and 12 of this variation, because you won't have time to worry about it when you start practicing the bowing in this variation. Now, as a preparatory exercise for the bow, I recommend to practice this bow technique on open strings. And I would not start in spiccato, but I would start slowly with the bow on the string. Now we have string crossings here, that's what this variation is about. And the arm position is always the position of the higher of the two strings. So if we start with the first two strings, that would be G and D string, my arm position has to be on the D string position, not on the G string position, on the D string position. And then what I do is I flick my hand up, just the hand, not the arm, for the G string position, because it's too fast to change the whole arm position in between each string. You'd be moving too much mass and you wouldn't get it up to speed, plus you would definitely tense up. So what you do is you do the string crossings just with your hand. I'll show you from the side. I'm exaggerating the movement. Basically what you do is you flick up your hand. So when you put your arm position on D string position, practice on the string with small bows. Same, next two strings. Put your arm position on A string and flick your hand up for D string. Same, E string, arm position E string, and you flick up for the A string. You can also exaggerate the accents a little bit. The accents come by flicking up. That's what makes the accents. And practice the sub-variations this way too, also on open strings. And the other one. So practice that with the bow staying on the string and make sure you master this movement. Now the next step is to do the same thing in spiccato, still on open strings, so that you can concentrate completely on what you're doing with your bow and don't have to worry about what notes you have to play. It's exactly the same. Your arm position has to be on the higher of the two strings, and you do the string crossing to the lower string by flicking up your hand. Practice that on all combinations of open strings, G and D string, D and A string, A and E string, and make sure you get used to this movement. It's the same as if the bow is on the string, you're just allowing your bow to bounce now. If this is new to you, then go back to other variations with spiccato and sautillet, where I go into how to do spiccato or how to do sautillet, also how to develop sautillet out of small bowings on the string. I won't go into it in further detail here. Also practice the sub-variations on open strings in spiccato. And the other one as well. That one's hard. The last sub-variation is quite difficult, so that might be a good idea to practice also a little bit slower. It helps a lot to practice these bowings on open strings, because that is one place where you can give your full attention to the bow. When you've practiced these bowings on open strings and you start practicing them in the variation, it's a good idea for practicing them slowly to practice them on the string. It's very important that you don't use much bow, because you don't want to go too far away from what you actually need. It won't help you with your bowing if you practice. It won't hurt you to practice that, but you're practicing playing the notes. You're not practicing the bowing. If you want to practice the bowing, you have to use very, very little bow, because you want it to be as close to spiccato as you can. You're just doing it on the strings if you've got time to do it slowly. Same again, remember the arm position is on the higher string, and the string crossing is done by flicking up your hand. That way you can concentrate on the movement. You won't be practicing this with a huge sound, obviously, because you have to do it with as little bow as possible, so that it's as close to spiccato as possible. So practice the variation that way. Give particular attention to bar 11 and 12. I'll start at bar 9. That's because of the shift into the second position. So that does require special attention as well. Now for speeding it up and practicing it spiccato, what you do is you make it as easy as possible for your left hand, and you do that by practicing just one bar repeatedly. At first, we'll start with bar 1. So what you do is you start off a little bit slower on the string, and then you speed up and allow the bow to bounce. That's basically how you practice it. When you reach a certain speed, the bow will start bouncing on its own, if you are already familiar with spiccato and sautillet. If this is literally the first time you're doing it, you'll have to see. The bow does start bouncing on its own, but of course you have to make sure that you adjust the weight and balance of your hand a little bit. But I wouldn't recommend learning spiccato in this variation. I would recommend learning spiccato in variation number 2, for example. There's plenty of variations with spiccato which we've gone over so far. The next step would be to put 2 bars together. And that way you can work your way through the whole variation. Go bar by bar and then work in 2 bars at a time. The next step would then be to put together 4 bars. And that way you're already well on the way to play the whole variation. Remember, bar 11 and 12 need special attention and more practicing time because you've got the shift into the second position and back down again. Now for the sub-variations, we have the first sub-variation, which is this one. That's actually easier than the original because it's more balanced. You have 2 notes on the lower string and 2 notes on the higher string. You practice it in the same way as you practice the variation. You start slowly with the bow on the string, going just 1 bar. And then what you do is you speed that up. And then the next bar. And then you put it together in the manner I described, how you practice the variation. The next one is a bit more difficult. That's this one. That one's more difficult because you have 1 note on the lower string, then 2 on the higher one, and then 1 note on the lower string again. One way to practice that is with distributing accents onto different notes. That will get it nice and clear. So what you could, for example, do, you put an accent on the first of each one. That's quite difficult. Then you put the accent onto the second one. Then you put the accent onto the third one. And then you put the accent onto the last one. You'll notice some of them are more difficult than others. And then again, practice it on the string, slowly, just doing 1 bar. And then the next bar. And then you speed that up bit by bit. And you can work your way through the variation in the same way that you did when you practiced the original variation. Okay, let me know in the comments if you have any questions and have fun with this one.